Imagine this. You're fast asleep, unaware that danger is creeping closer. A fire breaks out, trapping your family inside your home. The smoke is thick, the flames are rising, and panic sets in. But then, just when all hope seems lost, your dog, your best friend, the one you've trusted for years, becomes your hero. This is the true story of how one brave dog saved his family from a deadly fire, using nothing but instinct, loyalty, and pure courage. Stay with us for this heart-stopping journey that will leave you in awe of the unbreakable bond between humans and their furry protectors. The sun had just begun to rise over the sleepy American suburb. Dew still clung to the grass, and birds chirped softly outside the windows of a cozy home nestled at the end of Maplewood Lane. Inside the house, peace reigned. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the air. A gentle breeze moved the curtains, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only mechanical sound in the kitchen. It was Saturday, the kind of morning that stretches slowly, where each passing second feels like a treasure. The Parker family lived here. They were an ordinary American family. Michael, the father, worked in construction. Sarah, his wife, was a freelance illustrator working from home. They had a baby daughter named Lily, who had just turned 1 the month before. But the heart of the household, many would say, was George, Michael's father. George was retired. He had moved in a few years ago to help with Lily's arrival. Silver-haired and soft-spoken George spent most mornings on the front porch reading a novel or watching the world pass by. His presence brought comfort and a sense of stability to the house. He had wisdom stories and, most importantly, love to give. But George wasn't alone on that porch. Lying at his feet, as he did every morning without fail, was Max, the family's golden retriever. Max wasn't just any dog. He was family. Loyal. Gentle. Wise beyond his years. As the sunlight touched the edges of the porch, Max raised his head slightly, his amber eyes scanning the yard. His ears twitched. Then he rested again, placing his head gently over George's worn slippers. The old man reached down and patted him fondly. "You're up early, old boy," George said. Max let out a small grunt of acknowledgement. Inside, the kitchen was coming alive. Sarah fed Lily mashed bananas in her high chair. Lily squealed with joy, smearing the sticky fruit across her cheeks and tray. Michael, freshly showered, sat at the table sipping coffee, smiling as he watched his daughter's antics. It was an unremarkable morning in many ways, but that's what made it perfect. Every family has those days. The quiet, cozy ones. The ones filled with smiles, with no pressing errands or worries. You don't realize how precious those moments are until they're gone. Outside, the mail truck rumbled in the distance. The neighborhood slowly woke up. Garage doors opened, dogs barked, sprinklers ticked on. But inside, the Parker home time seemed to pause in a perfect bubble. George eventually came inside with Max at his heels. The dog trotted over to Lily and gave her a gentle nuzzle. She giggled and reached out with her chubby fingers to grab his fur. Sarah smiled warmly. "She loves you, Max," she said. Max wagged his tail in response. Everyone in the family had their own unique bond with Max. Michael often took him on evening jogs. Sarah spoke to him while she painted, calling him her studio assistant. And George and Max had a quiet understanding between them. In many ways, they were each other's shadow. Max had been with the Parkers since he was a puppy. 6 years ago, Michael had surprised Sarah with him as an anniversary gift. He was the smallest of the litter, but the moment Sarah held him, she knew he was the one. Since then, Max had seen them through moving homes, job changes, late nights, and now parenthood. He had been there for it all. That morning, as the sun rose higher and Lily finally tired herself out, Sarah picked her up and headed toward the nursery. Michael began tidying the kitchen, rinsing dishes and wiping down counters. George returned to his chair with a new book, and Max settled by the window, eyes half-lidded, always watching, always listening. Then for a moment, something shifted. Max's ears twitched again. He sniffed the air once. Then twice. A subtle change, perhaps undetectable to anyone else. But Max stood up. His body stiffened slightly. He walked to the back door and stared at the hallway that led toward the garage. George looked over. "What is it, boy?" he asked, setting his book down. Max didn't bark, but he didn't relax either. He stood tall, tail low, alert. Watching. Waiting. But nothing happened. The moment passed. Max slowly returned to his spot, though his ears remained upright, vigilant. George raised an eyebrow but shrugged it off. "Must be't have heard a squirrel," he murmured. Unbeknownst to them all, something had indeed changed. And Max had sensed it first, but the house, bathed in warmth and sunlight, gave no indication of what was creeping in the shadows. That night would be different. That night, everything would change. But for now, the Parkers were safe in their sanctuary, oblivious to the danger quietly drawing near. And Max, faithful Max, was already on alert. Max wasn't just a pet. He was woven into the very fabric of the Parker family's life. His paws had padded across their living room floor since he was a pup. He had witnessed their milestones, birthdays, anniversaries. Even the day baby Lily came home from the hospital, wrapped in a soft pink blanket. He had grown alongside their laughter, their sorrows, and their daily rhythms. When Michael first brought Max home, Sarah had just hung her art degree on the wall. They were a young couple, then filled with dreams but grounded by simple things like decorating their first nursery and saving up for a new washing machine. Max was part of those early days. He chewed on the corners of their couch, he barked at the vacuumed. He curled up between them on cold nights. George, who had lost his wife a few years prior, hadn't expected to bond with the dog. He had been polite, even distant at first, but something changed the day George fell on the back porch while putting up a bird feeder. It was Max who had barked furiously, alerting Michael and Sarah inside. Since then, George and Max had been inseparable. They shared the same chair. George would sometimes read aloud to him in the afternoons, swearing Max actually listened. There was something unique about the way Max interacted with each of them. With Sarah, he was gentle and calm, often lying beside her art desk for hours. With Michael, he was energetic, eager to fetch run play. With baby Lily, he was careful, almost parental, licking spilled milk from her fingers and standing watch as she crawled across the floor. And with George, he was loyal, constant, a silent friend who always seemed to understand. There were days Max would stare at the front door a moment before Michael arrived home, tail wagging before headlights even touched the driveway. And when Sarah was stressed or sad, Max would simply rest his head in her lap, nudging her hand gently with his nose until she smiled again. No words exchanged, just warmth, comfort, presence. To say Max was just a dog would be a lie. He was part guardian, part confidant, part child, part old soul. The Parkers often joked that Max had a sixth sense. He knew when someone wasn't feeling well. He would lie close when George's arthritis flared up. He barked once, just once, when Lily tugged at a loose socket cover. Somehow Max was always there. That evening, as twilight colored the skies, the family sat out back under string lights. Sarah rocked Lily gently in her arms. Michael flipped burgers on the grill. George leaned back in a lawn chair, eyes half closed, and Max lay in the grass, front paws outstretched, watching his family with quiet contentment. The crickets chirped. A warm breeze rustled the trees. Laughter drifted through the yard as Michael pretended to serve Max a burger on a plate. The dog, always polite, waited until George gave the signal before taking the treat. "This dog," George said, smiling, "has more manners than I do." Sarah chuckled. "He's the best of us." The sky turned navy, and stars began to blink awake. Lily, now drowsy, lay in Sarah's lap. Max moved closer and curled up by her feet, as if he knew, even in dreams, she might need him nearby. And that night, after everyone went inside, Max paused for a moment at the back door. He looked around the yard, ears perked. The wind carried a strange scent, not enough to worry him, but enough to make him alert. He stared into the dark for several long seconds. Then, satisfied for now, he walked inside. The family went to bed. The lights turned off one by one. But Max didn't immediately settle. He checked each room first. He looked in on Lily's crib, then wandered to George's room to listen for the steady rhythm of his breathing. Only after that, once the house was quiet and safe, did Max finally curl up on his bed near the hallway. In the silence, he stayed awake just a little longer, as if he knew that soon everything was about to change. That night felt different, though no one in the Parker household noticed. At first, the air carried a subtle tension, something just beneath the surface. The neighborhood lay still, wrapped in darkness, and the occasional flicker of porch lights. Inside the Parker home, the windows glowed softly, laughter fading as bedtime routines began. Sarah had already tucked Lily into her crib upstairs. The baby stirred once, but quickly fell back asleep, with her favorite stuffed rabbit nestled against her cheek. Michael rinsed the last of the dinner dishes, while George dozed in his armchair, a blanket draped across his lap, and an old western playing softly on the television. Max lay near the back door, ears twitching. It started with a scent, faint, barely there. But to Max it was enough. His nose wrinkled slightly. He stood, turned toward the garage wall, and sniffed again. Something was off. To the human nose, nothing had changed. No alarms sounded. No strange lights flickered. Just the usual silence of a house winding down for the night. But Max's instincts were whispering louder with each passing second. He padded toward the kitchen, paused near the pantry, and then looked up at the ceiling. He let out a low whine, a sound that Sarah, upstairs reading, did not hear. Michael didn't hear it either as he wiped down the counters, his thoughts already drifting towards sleep. Only George stirred. Max, he called groggily from the living room. The dog padded in and sat at his feet, ears forward, eyes fixed on the hallway. George blinked, adjusting his glasses. You all right, boy? Max didn't move. George sat up, the blanket sliding from his knees. He leaned in and patted Max on the head, more curious than concerned. You smell something. Still nothing obvious in the air. No smoke. No flicker of flames. But Max's nose didn't lie. Minutes ticked by. Michael turned off the kitchen light and headed for the stairs. Night, Dad, he called. George waved half-heartedly. Night, son. Max remained rooted to the spot. He sniffed again, sharper now. More certain. Then came the faintest pop. Soft like a balloon bursting 2 rooms away. Michael paused on the third step, head tilted. You hear that? George nodded slowly. Yeah. A second pop, this time louder. Michael turned and walked back toward the kitchen. As he stepped through the doorway, he smelled it. Burning plastic. An acrid sting at the back of his throat. Then he saw it. A thin line of smoke curling up from behind the pantry wall. Sarah! He yelled. Get Lily! George shot up from his chair. Max barked sharp and loud, running to the stairs as Sarah emerged in a rush. What's happening? She cried, already turning back toward Lily's room. Michael yanked open the pantry door. The source was behind the wall, electrical maybe? The garage side? The smell grew stronger. Fire. Real. And growing. He slammed the door shut, then ran for the fire extinguisher near the hallway. But Max was already ahead of him, sprinting upstairs. Smoke began to roll into the hallway ceiling like a slow, dark tide. Max barked furiously outside Lily's room. Sarah rushed out with the baby in her arms, coughing, eyes wide. George met them at the top of the stairs. Downstairs! Michael shouted. I'll try to slow it down! But the fire was quicker, faster than logic. Faster than control. It began to spread through the walls, an angry red glow now visible beneath the pantry doorframe. Max turned and bounded down the stairs beside Sarah and George, guiding them toward the front of the house. Michael sprayed the extinguisher, but it sputtered weakly. The fire roared louder. The house, their safe haven, was becoming a trap. But Max wasn't leaving without everyone. He barked and ran back up the stairs. Michael! George bellowed. Come on, son. And through the thickening smoke, Michael finally emerged. He was coughing, eyes stinging soot on his shirt. Max barked again, nipping lightly at Michael's sleeve, pulling him forward, urging him to move faster. Together the family stumbled out the front door, coughing, shaken barefoot on the lawn. Behind them, flames erupted from a back window. The night exploded with sirens, neighbors pouring out onto lawns, phones in hand, lights flashing. But the Parkers were safe. Because Max had known. Because Max had warned them. Because Max had not left anyone behind. He stood at the center of them now, tail still, eyes watchful, as if waiting for more danger to reveal itself. Michael sank to his knees and wrapped his arms around the dog. "You saved us," he whispered. Max licked his face, then finally calmly sat down beside Lily's stroller, eyes still on the house. Waiting. Watching. Guarding. Smoke thickened quickly. That pungent chemical scent clung to the air and burned at the back of Sarah's throat as she held Lily tightly to her chest. The baby stirred and whimpered but didn't cry, still half asleep, her small body unaware of the looming danger. Max darted around them, barking sharply, insistently. His tail was rigid, ears perked, muscles coiled with energy. It was as if every nerve in his body screamed the same message. "Get out! Now!" Michael dropped the extinguisher. The flames were too deep, tucked inside the garage wall. The fire was invisible, but its presence was undeniable. Heat began to radiate from the pantry, a subtle but unmistakable force growing stronger by the second. "We need to go," Michael said, trying to stay calm. "We need to leave now." George was already in the hallway, wheezing slightly from the smoke. "I'll get the front door," he said, coughing once and covering his mouth with a sleeve. Max ran ahead of him but suddenly stopped halfway down the stairs. His body stiffened. He turned and looked up at Sarah, Lily, and Michael, then growled low in his throat. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, stepping down toward the landing. Just then a dull thud shook the walls. A muffled explosion from the garage. The lights flickered, then went out completely. The hallway plunged into semi-darkness, now lit only by a dim, flickering orange glow reflecting through the baseboards and kitchen floor. The fire was no longer creeping, it was marching fast. "The garage is fully involved," Michael said quickly. "Don't go through the front! The fire's moving too fast from that side." Sarah spun around. "Then how?" "The back," Michael said. "The sliding door in the living room." George began moving slowly, shielding his eyes as smoke flooded down the staircase. But when they reached the living room, reality hit. The fire had already reached the back wall. The curtains smoldered. The wooden beam above the door crackled, glowing red. The exit was blocked. "Window!" Michael shouted, his voice hoarse. "We go out the window!" He rushed to the side wall, tugging at the old latch. But the years hadn't been kind to the frame. It stuck. He pulled harder. Smoke now billowed overhead. The fire in the kitchen spread like a rising tide, licking across the ceiling and crawling toward them. Sarah covered Lily's mouth and nose with her shirt. The baby was coughing now, eyes wide and watering. Max barked again, one sharp sound, and bolted up the stairs. "What's he doing?" Sarah asked, panicked. "I don't know," Michael said, grunting as he forced the window open an inch more. Then they heard it. Barking. Scraping. From upstairs. George turned, staggering through the hallway back to the stairs. "Max!" he shouted. A moment later, the golden retriever returned, dragging a towel in his mouth. Soaked. He had nosed it into the bathroom sink, knocked the faucet on, and returned with the only protection he could find. Michael's eyes widened. "Good boy." Max dropped the wet towel at Sarah's feet and nosed it toward Lily. She wrapped it around the baby instinctively. Max barked again, then turned to the hallway toward the stairs leading to the second-floor guest bedroom. "That window," George said suddenly. "It's bigger. Opens easier." Michael nodded. Max was already sprinting. The family didn't hesitate. Michael scooped Lily into his arms, carefully keeping the damp towel wrapped around her tiny body. Sarah stayed close behind, one hand on her husband's back, the other holding tightly to George's wrist. Max led the way, bounding 2 steps at a time up the staircase, pausing only to glance back and bark urgently when someone lagged. The smoke had reached the second floor, now seeping under doorways and curling along the ceiling like a ghost. Each breath was harder than the last. George's coughing grew more intense, and Michael wrapped his arm around his father's shoulder to help him up the final few steps. The door to the guest room stood open. Max ran inside, jumped onto the bed, and pressed his paws against the window. He barked again, then looked back at them as if to say, "Here, This is the way. Michael rushed to the window. Unlike the one downstairs, this one moved smoothly. Years of disuse hadn't sealed it shut. He slid it open, letting in a welcome burst of cold night air. Below, only a single story dropped to the backyard lawn. A manageable jump, but with the baby and George it wouldn't be easy, Sarah Michael said. You first. I'll hand Lily down. Sarah nodded, hands trembling, and swung her legs over the windowsill. She hung there for a second before letting go, landing on the grass with a soft thud and stumbling to her knees. Michael turned and placed Lily gently into George's arms. Hold her, Dad. Just until I am down. George cradled the baby against his chest, her small fists gripping the wet towel. Her cheeks flushed from the heat. Max stood beside them, his body pressed protectively to George's side. Michael climbed onto the windowsill, crouched and jumped. The impact jolted up through his legs, but he was already up again, arms raised. Pass her! He shouted. George lowered Lily carefully. Michael reached up, grasped her securely, and pulled her down into his arms. Sarah was there in an instant, wrapping herself around her baby, tears streaming down her soot-streaked face. Now it was George's turn. He hesitated at the window. The smoke was thicker now, and the ceiling creaked above him. Max nudged his leg as if to say, "You can do this." George looked at the dog eyes full of both love and pain. "Go on, Max," he said, choking on smoke. "You first." Max stared at him, then backed up 2 steps, sprinted forward, and leapt through the open window in a blur of gold. He landed hard, stumbled, but got up, tail wagging weakly. Then George climbed onto the sill. He looked down, just 8 feet, maybe 10. But for someone his age it felt like a canyon. Michael and Sarah stood below, arms outstretched. "Dad, jump!" Michael shouted. "We've got you!" The house groaned again. Then George jumped. He hit the grass awkwardly and cried out. But Michael caught most of his weight, helping him sit upright. He was shaking but alive. And they were out. They scrambled away from the house, the windows behind them shattered with a deafening pop. Flames erupted through the living room and climbed skyward in a terrifying plume. Michael, Sarah, George, Lily, and Max stood together in the yard, coughing, crying, holding each other as their home was consumed in a roar of heat and light. The wail of sirens could be heard in the distance, now growing louder. Help was on the way. But the true rescue had already happened. Max, their beloved golden retriever, the unseen guardian, had acted before the flames claimed them. He'd known. He'd led them. He had saved them. George pulled Max close, burying his face in the dog's fur, whispering over and over, "Thank you. Thank you, boy." And Max simply leaned in closer as if to say, "Of course. You're my family. Let me take you back before the fire. Before the sirens. Before Max became a hero." At the heart of this story is a family. Just a regular, everyday American family, the kind you'd pass by on a sidewalk and smile at without knowing their story. But behind the front door of their pale blue house on Maplewood Lane lived something truly special. Now this house, it wasn't fancy. 2 stories, white shutters, a small porch with a creaky wooden swing, and flower beds out front. But what made it shine was the people inside. First there was George. George was the grandfather, retired, wise, and gentle. He loved books, black coffee, and quiet mornings. Most days, you'd find him on that porch, rocking slowly with a worn paperback in one hand, and Max at his feet. Yeah, Max. You'll hear that name a lot. Max wasn't just a dog, he was family. A golden retriever with soft eyes and a coat like sunlight. He was 6 years old now, but still had the energy of a pup when Lily laughed. Lily being the baby of the family, just 1 year old. But back to George. Harold lost his wife some years ago. The kind of loss that doesn't go away, not really. But moving in with his son Michael and his daughter-in-law Sarah had brought him peace. And Max filled the quiet spaces. No barking, no fuss, just always there. Michael, George's son, was in his early 30s. A solid guy. Worked long hours managing construction projects across town. He had calloused hands, tired eyes, but a soft heart. He didn't talk much, but when he smiled at his daughter, you could feel the love radiate from him. Sarah, Michael's wife, now she was the light of the house. A freelance illustrator who worked from home. She saw the world in colors and sketches, and somehow found time to care for a toddler, cook dinner, and laugh through the chaos. She was the glue. The warm voice in the kitchen, the one who called Max her first baby, because, let's be honest, for 6 years he was. And then there was Lily. Little Lily, 1-year-old, full of life and already best friends with Max. She called him Makaya. Not dog, not puppy, just Makaya. Shed wobbled after him down the hallway, hands reaching, giggling every time he wagged that big fluffy tail. And Max was so gentle, always a step ahead, careful not to knock her down, always watching. Every morning the house followed a rhythm. George out on the porch with his book, Michael at the table sipping coffee, checking emails. Sarah feeding Lily mashed bananas, humming something soft, and Max, always in the middle of it all, tail wagging, eyes, soft ears perked. Always watching, always ready. You see, this wasn't just a family with a dog. This was a pack. They belonged to each other in a way that words sometimes fail to explain. And that bond, that connection, it was the kind that doesn't break, not even under the weight of smoke, flames, and fear. But we're not there yet. Right now, things are still calm. The world still feels safe, and Max is just lying at George's feet, watching the morning light dance across the yard. Deep inside, something in him already knows. Something's coming. And hell, be ready. Now let's talk about Max. Not just what he looked like, though. Yeah, he was a beauty. Golden fur that shimmered in the sunlight, floppy ears that perked up with every sound, and eyes so deep, so soulful, it was like he could read your thoughts. But that wasn't what made Max special. It was who he was. You know how some dogs just know? Like they don't need words, they feel things, understand things. That was Max. He wasn't trained for rescue, no military background, no flashy tricks. He didn't need that. What he had was heart. Ever since he was a pup, Max was different. He never liked loud noises. Hated fireworks. But if Lily cried, he'd be there in seconds. If Sarah so much as sniffled, Max would nudge her hand with his nose like, "Hey, I am here." He had this sixth sense for emotion. Like he was wired not just to live alongside the family, but to carry their feelings too. George, the grandfather, Max, was his shadow. Wherever George went, Max followed. Every step. Porch to kitchen. Kitchen to garden. Garden to garage. Always a pace behind, quiet and calm. The old man used to joke, "This dog knows me better than I know myself." And honestly, he probably wasn't wrong. Now with Lily, it was like Max had been born to be her guardian. Even when she was still crawling, Max would lie down next to her. Not just nearby. Next to her. Tail tucked in. Head down low. He'd let her grab his ears, smack his nose, giggle in his fur. Never once did he growl or flinch. He just accepted her love. And gave it back tenfold. Michael? He wasn't the overly emotional type. But even he had a soft spot for Max. Every time he walked through the door after work, boots clunky with dust, Max would be there. Waiting. Tail thumping the floor, mouth open in that goofy retriever smile. Didn't matter how bad the day was, that moment right there made it better. And Sarah, she swore Max could understand English. Max, go get Lily's blanket, she'd say, half joking, and darn if he didn't come trotting back with it. Max, sit by the high chair while I cook. Done. He wasn't just a dog, he was the heartbeat of that house. He brought calm during tantrums, company during lonely mornings, a warm body to cry into on hard days. He didn't ask for anything, just to be near his people. And they gave him love in return. Treats, of course. He had a favorite peanut butter biscuits. Sarah baked them herself sometimes. George used to sneak Max bacon when no one was looking. Lily once tried to share her pacifier. Max politely declined. But here's the thing. As connected as they all were to Max, none of them truly understood just how deep that bond ran. Not yet, because up until now, Max had never needed to be more than a pet. But soon he would be called to something greater. His instincts, his loyalty, that mysterious knowing inside him it was all going to be tested. And when that moment came, when the smoke filled the air and time ran thin, Max wouldn't hesitate. He would act. He would protect. And he would do what no one else could. But for now, it was still quiet. Just a family. And a dog like no other. You know, it's the little things that really show you how strong a bond is. And in that house on that quiet street, in the middle of an ordinary American town, the bond between Max and his family showed up in the smallest, most beautiful ways. Let's start with mornings. Every single day Max was the first one awake. Well, technically George was, but Max. He was already sitting by the bedroom doortail swishing, ready to follow him out like a silent morning patrol partner. George would shuffle down to the kitchen, put on the coffee pot, and Max would sit, ears perked like, "All right, old man, what's on the agenda today?" No barking, no chaos, just presence. He'd sit there watching the sunrise with George. Quiet, loyal. It wasn't flashy, but it meant everything. Then came Lily's laughter. That was the signal for the whole house to come alive. And when that baby girl laughed, oh, Max lit up. You'd swear he was grinning, tongue out, spinning in little circles. He adored her. Sometimes Sarah would place Lily on a blanket in the living room floor while she folded laundry. Max's hair had settled beside the baby, not too close, not too far, just right. Watching her. Making sure no one touched her, no toy got stuck, no roll took her too far, like a golden guardian angel. You couldn't teach that. That was love. Deep animal love. And Michael, the protector of the house, the provider, the fixer, well, even he had a soft spot when it came to Max. After long days, he'd walk through that door tired to the bone, and there Max was. Every single time. Not bouncing or jumping. Just there. A quiet reminder. You're home now. It's okay. And sometimes, just sometimes, Michael would drop to one knee and wrap his arms around Max's neck, burying his face into that golden fur, like a man who knew he could finally exhale. That's what Max gave them all, peace. He gave them peace. Even Sarah, in her quiet moments when Lily was napping and the house was still shed, find herself sitting on the couch, sketchbook in her lap. Max curled up at her feet. Just the sound of her pencil scratching paper and his slow breathing was enough to calm the world. And they'd all say the same thing if you asked them. We don't know how he does it. He just knows. Max had never needed a leash unless they were out walking. He'd never destroyed anything, never barked unnecessarily. When the doorbell rang, he'd stand between the family and the front door. Not aggressive, just alert. Watchful. He was balanced. As if he knew his role was more than wagging his tail or fetching sticks. He was a soul in tune with his people. And they felt it. You could see it in George's eyes when he scratched Max behind the ears, in Sarah's voice when she told stories about him to her mom on the phone, in the way Lily giggled when Max licked her fingers, in Michael's silent nods when Max stood beside him at the backyard fence. These weren't just shared moments, they were stitched into the fabric of their lives, and the thing is, they didn't think twice about it. Because when love is that constant, that normal, you start to believe it'll always be there. But nothing lasts forever, does it? Because while these precious, ordinary moments played out, something else was stirring. Something that would test everything. The peace, the routine, the rhythm of love they had built, it was all about to be thrown into chaos. And when that moment came, when the smoke rose and the heat pressed in from all sides, they would come to understand just how extraordinary, their ordinary days really were, because Max wasn't just a pet. He was their anchor, their quiet strength. And they were about to need him more than ever before. If there was one person in the house Max was glued to the most, it was George. George and Max. They were a pair, like two old souls, who just understood each other without saying a word. Every morning, like clockwork, George would grab his coffee step out onto the porch with his novel in hand, and there was Max tail wagging, pacing ahead just a few feet like let's go partner. George had this soft way of speaking. Not many words, but always kind. And Max, he didn't need commands, he just followed. Sat beside the chair, head on George's foot, eyes half closed, tail slowly tapping the porch wood. Sometimes George would chuckle and say, "You know, Max, you're the best company a man could ask for." And Max had thumping his tail once like I know. See, George wasn't as fast as he used to be. His knees cracked a little when he got up, his back ached more often than not. But Max always matched his pace, walking beside him in the yard or up the driveway to check the mail. Never ahead. Never pulling. Always by his side. Neighbors would stop and wave. Some would smile and say, "You two make quite the team." And George would laugh. "Well, he keeps me out of trouble." But everyone knew it was deeper than that. Max had this uncanny sense of when George was feeling low. You know those days? The ones where memory gets foggy, where loneliness creeps in even when the house is full? On those days, Max never left his side. Not for a second. He'd nudge George's arm gently, or lay his head in George's lap. Sometimes he'd even bring one of Lily's toys and drop it at George's feet as if saying, "Hey, smile for me." And it worked. Because George would chuckle, pick up that slobbery little stuffed duck, and toss it half-heartedly across the room. And Max, bless him, he'd sprint like it was the best game in the world. But here's what really got people. Every single night, without fail, Max would walk George to bed. No one told him to. He just knew. George would get up from the couch, stretch a little, and Max would trot right behind him down the hall. And once George was under the covers, Max would sit at the foot of the bed until he heard those slow, steady breaths of sleep. Then, and only then, would he curl up on his rug and rest. It wasn't just companionship. It was devotion. And George, he wasn't shy about it. Whenever people asked about Max, his eyes lit up. That dog, he'd say, he's not just smart. He's something else. He's got a soul. He even kept a framed photo of Max on his bedside table, right next to a photo of his late wife. That's how much Max meant to him. So when you think about what Max did later on in that terrifying moment in that house full of smoke and flame, remember this part. Remember the porch. The quiet mornings. The walks. The silent understanding between an old man and a dog who never needed to be told what to do. Because what Max did in the chaos, that came from a place of pure love. And George, well, George always knew. He'd say it every once in a while when no one else was listening. He'd pat Max on the head, look him in the eyes, and whisper, "I don't know how I got so lucky with you, boy." And Max's head just lay his head back down and stay. You know, there's something truly special about the bond between a family and their dog. Especially when that dog has proven time and time again that they're not just a pet, but a true member of the family. Max wasn't just any dog to the Parkers. No, he was their protector, their companion, and their friend. Take Sarah, for instance. Max wasn't just there for the fun moments, though he certainly loved to play fetch and chase his tail. For Sarah, Max was her comfort. Whenever life felt overwhelming, when the demands of being a mom, a wife, and a freelance illustrator piled up, Max was there. He'd nudged her gently with his nose, offering silent support. In those little moments, Max somehow knew exactly what she needed, and he'd always find a way to make things feel just a little easier. Michael had a similar connection with Max. They had their playful side. Max loved chasing after the ball, no matter how many times Michael threw it. But Michael knew that Max wasn't just there to play. Max was his constant. The one who was always there after a tough day at work, wagging his tail, eager to greet him with that familiar, unconditional love. And then there's George. If you remember, George had lost his wife a couple of years ago. After that, life felt different. It was hard for him to find joy in things. But Max Max was there silently sitting by his side, whether it was during their quiet walks around the neighborhood or those peaceful mornings on the porch. George didn't have to say a word. Max was simply present. He didn't need much, just being there with George was enough. Now, little Lily, she didn't yet have the words to describe it, but she shared her own kind of connection with Max. She'd giggle when Max licked her face or nuzzled her gently, and Max, being the gentle giant he was, would patiently sit by her, letting her pull at his fur, always wagging his tail. It was their game. A sweet, unspoken game of love. As the days passed, Max became more than just a dog in the Parkers' lives. He was part of the family's heartbeat. He wasn't just a dog. They all knew it. Max is family. But you know in life things change when you least expect it. And the Parkers didn't know it, but that ordinary evening, which felt just like any other, was about to turn into something unimaginable. Max had no idea that the calm and peaceful night they were enjoying would soon spiral into chaos. But Max's instincts kicked in before anyone else noticed. Something wasn't right. Max could sense it. And soon the Parkers would realize just how much they depended on their loyal companion. Max was about to show them just how deep his love and protection ran. That's right, Max was about to become the hero. The dog they trusted with their hearts would now save them without a moment's hesitation. And when everything was over and the smoke cleared, they would never look at Max the same way again. He wasn't just their dog. He was their savior. It was just another evening for the Parker family. Picture it. The soft light of the setting sun filtering through the windows, the kind of peaceful golden hour that makes everything feel calm and serene. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Michael was finishing up a few things in the garage. He'd been working on some repairs, trying to get the house ready for the winter. Sarah was in the kitchen stirring a pot of stew, and Lily, well, she was crawling around, playing with her toys and giggling as she tried to stand up, still finding her balance as a 1-year-old. Outside, Max was lounging on the porch, his favorite place to relax. He had his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed as the last rays of sunlight warmed his fur. It was peaceful, but even though everything seemed calm, even though the world outside looked perfect, there was something lurking in the background, something Max could feel. Something none of the humans could. Now, you know how sometimes when things feel too quiet, it can almost be unnerving? Well, it was just like that. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. But Max wasn't worried about the air. He was paying attention to something else, something far more serious. Max had always been observant, always aware of his surroundings. If you've ever had a dog, you know how they can sometimes sense things before we do. Maybe it's the way they hear things we can't, or maybe it's just the way they can feel changes in the environment. Whatever it was, Max had this deep, instinctual understanding of when something was off. It was in moments like this, in the calm before the storm, that you'd see Max at his most alert. He wasn't barking, not yet. He wasn't panicking. He was just watching. And he could feel that something was wrong. The air in the house, despite the cozy atmosphere, had started to shift. A faint smell of something burning, something faint but distinct, was beginning to curl through the air. Max's nose twitched, his ears pricked up. He stood slowly, still not barking, just sniffing, scanning the environment around him. Sarah, who had been chopping vegetables, didn't notice at first. Neither did Michael, who was still in the garage. Lily was too young to understand. But Max knew something wasn't right. He turned his head, looking toward the kitchen, then to the living room. He moved closer to the door, sniffing around the edges of the room, pacing in small circles. His body was tense now. He could smell it more clearly. Something was burning. And then, in that moment, it happened. A low, crackling sound, almost like the sound of a branch breaking in the forest, broke the silence. The house was still, and then snap. A tiny, almost invisible wisp of smoke curled out from behind the wall just above the kitchen. Max's body went rigid. His ears were standing at attention now, and his eyes widened. His tail, which had been lazily wagging moments before, was now still. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. This was real. Max barked. Once, loud enough for Sarah to hear it over the hum of the kitchen. Sarah turned confused and glanced at the dog. Max had already moved to the door, pacing back and forth with urgency. His eyes were wide, his body tense with an unmistakable sense of urgency. And Sarah, though she couldn't yet see the danger, could sense the change in the air. The way Max was behaving, this wasn't just playful energy anymore. This was something else entirely. Before Sarah could react, Max barked again. His call was sharp, more insistent this time. She put down the knife in her hand and rushed toward the door, following Max's frantic movements. It didn't take long for her to realize what he was trying to warn her about. The air now felt thick with smoke, and the crackling sound had grown louder, unmistakable. The house was on fire. Max knew long before anyone else could have figured it out. In his quiet way, he had sensed it. He had smelled it in the air, felt it in his bones, and he had tried to warn them. But now, the smoke was growing thicker. The flames were beginning to grow, and the Parker family was about to face the most terrifying moment of their lives. Max's warning had come just in time, and as you'll soon see, this was when Max's true strength would shine. The moment Sarah realized the house was on fire, her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the smell of smoke in the air, or the crackling sounds growing louder. It was the sheer reality of the situation. The warmth of the fire seemed to seep into the walls, and the heat was palpable, almost suffocating. Sarah's first instinct was to grab Lily. She looked to the crib in the corner of the room, but the smoke was already getting thicker, swirling in from the hallway. There was no time to think, only time to act. Max, sensing the rising panic in Sarah, didn't hesitate. He was already at her side, barking again urgently, as if telling her to move to get out. Sarah grabbed Lily, who was still half asleep, her tiny arms flailing around in confusion as her mother scooped her up and rushed toward the door. But the hallway was thick with smoke, and the heat from the fire was starting to become unbearable. Sarah felt a rush of panic rising within her chest. Where was Michael? Was he okay? Was the fire blocking the front door? Michael! She screamed, but her voice barely carried over the growing roar of the flames. She could hear the crackling, the sound of something breaking, and knew that the fire had already spread beyond control. It was no longer a small fire in the kitchen. It was taking over, devouring everything in its path. Michael, hearing Sarah's frantic voice, ran from the garage, already covered in a thin layer of sweat from the heat. He could see the flames licking at the walls from behind the door. "Get out! We need to leave now!" he shouted as he rushed towards Sarah and Lily. The house was no longer safe. Every second was critical, but as Sarah looked around in panic, she realized they were stuck. The windows were too high to climb out of, and the smoke had filled every corner of the house. There was no way to escape through the front. The back door was blocked. Their exit had been cut off. Max was the first to act. He was already in motion, weaving between Sarah and Michael, his tail tucked and his body low to the ground. He barked again, but this time it wasn't a warning. It was a call to action. Max wasn't just standing there. He was moving, pacing back and forth as if to say, "Follow me." Michael, still in shock, glanced at Sarah. "What's he doing?" he asked, his voice tight. "I don't know, but I trust him," Sarah replied. Max had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to let them stay there. He was going to lead them out of this. With no other choice, they followed Max through the smoke-filled hallways. The heat was intense, making it harder to breathe. The fire's roar was deafening now, and Sarah could feel the weight of fear pressing down on her chest. She glanced down at Lily, still cradled in her arms, and then at Michael, whose face was pale, a mask of fear. But Max was fearless. He had been calm and determined from the moment he sensed the fire, and now in the chaos of the moment he was guiding them every step of the way. Max didn't hesitate. He led them to the back door, which was slightly ajar, and as they reached it, Max stood in front of it, pushing it open further with his body. He barked once more as if urging them to move faster. Without looking back, Sarah and Michael stepped out of the house with Max right at their heels. The fresh air outside was a shock to their senses. The cool night air felt like a lifeline. Sarah could breathe again, though the terror of what had just happened still clung to her. She felt the weight of relief in her chest, but also a deep sense of gratitude for Max. Max had led them out of the fire. He had been their guide through the smoke and the chaos. But even as they stood outside, watching their home go up in flames, they couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of loss. This was their home, their safe place, but as the fire raged behind them, one thought kept circling in their minds. If it weren't for Max, we wouldn't be here. Max was more than just a pet. He was their hero. The fire, which had started as a small spark, was now a roaring inferno, and all they could do was watch. But in the midst of the destruction, they had one thing: each other. And they had Max. It was only then that Sarah truly understood what Max had done. He had saved their lives, and now, standing in the cool night air, she looked down at him, her loyal, brave companion, and whispered, "You saved us, Max!" And Max, as if to say it's nothing, simply wagged his tail. After the fire was put out, the night seemed eerily quiet. The crackling of the flames was gone, and all that remained was the faint, smoky scent that clung to the air. It was hard to believe that just hours ago, their house had been alive with warmth, laughter, and the sounds of everyday life. Now, the only thing left was the stark outline of a home reduced to ashes. But, despite the devastation, there was a sense of relief. They had made it out alive. They had Max to thank for that. Without him, they may not have made it in time. The feeling of his presence, calm and steady, still lingered in the air. The family standing together outside was safe, but the sense of loss was heavy. Sarah held Lily close, her arms wrapped protectively around her. The little girl's eyes were wide, still too young to fully understand what had just happened, but her mother's comfort was enough. Michael stood beside Sarah, his arm around her waist, his gaze fixed on the smoldering wreckage of their home. It was impossible to fathom how quickly everything had gone up in flames. Max stood a few feet away, his body tense, as he watched the fire trucks roll in. The bright lights of the emergency vehicles reflected off his golden coat, but he didn't seem bothered. He was calm, just like he always had been. Even in the face of danger, Max had kept it together, guiding them to safety with a sense of purpose that no one else had. "Max, you were incredible," Michael said, his voice filled with awe as he looked at the dog. "You saved us. We owe you everything." Max wagged his tail as if to say, "No need for thanks. I am just doing my job." It was in moments like these that Sarah realized how much more Max was than a pet. He was family. He was their protector. And tonight, he had been their hero. The fire trucks had finished their work, and the firefighters began to pack up their work done for the night. So for the Parkers, the night had just begun. They stood together staring at the remnants of their home, unsure of what the next step would be. Their lives had been flipped upside down in an instant, but there was one thing they knew for sure. No matter what happened next, they would get through it. Together. It would be a long road ahead filled with insurance claims, rebuilding, and the task of starting over. But in that moment, standing in the cold night air, the Parkers felt a sense of gratitude for the simple things: their safety, each other, and Max. Max, the dog who had saved their lives, had never once asked for anything in return. He didn't need praise or recognition. All he needed was to be there for the people he loved, and that was enough. Sarah reached down and scratched behind Max's ears. "You're the best boy, Max," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. Max, always humble, simply sat by her side, his eyes gentle, his tail wagging softly in the glow of the fire truck's lights. It was as if he understood that his job was done, and now it was time for the family to heal. As the night stretched on, the family knew there was still a lot of work to be done. But they also knew that with Max by their side, there was nothing they couldn't face together. The fire had taken their home, but it hadn't taken their family. It hadn't taken their love. And it certainly hadn't taken Max. That night, as they sat on the cold ground, Max curled up beside them, and for the first time in hours, they felt a sense of peace. Because with Max, they were never alone. The next few days were a blur of activity visits from the insurance adjusters, meetings with the fire department, and the arduous task of figuring out what came next. But even in the midst of the chaos, one thing remained constant: Max. He had not left their side since the fire. He stayed close, his presence, a silent reassurance that, no matter how hard things got, they weren't alone. As the days passed, the family made arrangements for temporary housing while they worked on rebuilding their lives. It wasn't easy. There were moments when it felt like everything was falling apart, when the weight of the loss felt too much to bear. But through it all, Max kept his calm, his steady presence, providing the family with a sense of grounding. It was on the third morning after the fire that Sarah realized something profound. They were sitting on the couch in their temporary apartment, the smell of fresh coffee in the air. Michael was reading the newspaper, Lily was playing with her toys, and Max was lying at Sarah's feet. The chaos had slowed down for a moment, and for the first time since the fire, Sarah felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. Max had a way of making her feel that way. It wasn't just about the fire, it was about everything he had done for them every day in every small way. Whether it was lying next to George when he was lonely, playing fetch with Lily in the yard, or just offering a listening ear when Sarah needed to talk, Max had always been there. And now, after the fire, he was still there, reminding them that no matter how bad things got, they had each other. "Look at him," Sarah said, her voice soft as she watched Max sleeping peacefully at her feet. "He's been through so much, yet he's still here with us. He's the reason we're all okay." Michael looked over at her, nodding. "Yeah, he's the one who saved us. He's the reason we're all still here." Max stirred slightly at the sound of his name but didn't get up. He just lifted his head, looked at Sarah and Michael for a moment, then lay back down with a contented sigh. To him, it was just another day. A day with his family, the ones he loved and protected. As Sarah watched Max, she felt a sense of hope rising within her. They had lost so much: their home, their belongings, the comfort of their routine. But they still had each other. And they still had Max. It was the smallest things that gave her hope. Like the way Max nuzzled against her leg, or how he curled up next to Lily while she slept. The little moments of peace that made life feel normal again, even when everything else felt like it was in ruins. The fire had taken away so much, but it hadn't taken away their family. It hadn't taken away their love for each other. And it hadn't taken away Max, their unspoken hero. "Thank you, buddy," Michael whispered, looking at Max as the dog lifted his head and wagged his tail lazily in response. Max didn't need words. He had always known exactly what his family needed. And in return they had given him a life full of love and affection. Ask for much. Just a warm place to sleep, a ball to fetch, and most importantly, their love. And that he had in abundance. In the coming weeks, the family would face many challenges rebuilding their home, figuring out their future, and processing the trauma of the fire. But with Max by their side, they knew they could handle it. For Sarah, Michael, and little Lily, life had changed forever. But the bond they shared with Max had grown even stronger. It was a bond built on trust, love, and most importantly, the courage to face whatever came next. And as the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for the dog who had saved them all. Max wasn't just a dog. He was family. And they were forever thankful for him. The days following the fire were filled with mixed emotions: sadness over the loss of their home, uncertainty about the future, but also an overwhelming sense of gratitude for their lives. In the midst of all the chaos, one thing became crystal clear. Max, the golden retriever, who had been a loyal companion for years, was more than just a pet. He was their guardian, the family's silent hero. Sarah sat on the couch, gently rocking Lily to sleep in her arms. The room was quiet, the only sound, the soft hum of the air conditioning. It was the first time in days that Sarah had allowed herself a moment to just sit and breathe. She glanced over at Max, who was lying peacefully by the door, his eyes half closed but still alert. Max had always been protective, but now, in the aftermath of the fire, it was almost as if he knew he had a higher purpose. He never left the family's side, whether it was keeping watch over Lily as she napped, or staying close to George when he became anxious. Max was there, always ready to step up when needed. One afternoon, just a few days after the fire, Sarah noticed something strange. Max had been restless all morning, pacing around the house as if he couldn't settle. He would stop in one room, sniff around, and then move to the next. Sarah tried to dismiss it at first, thinking he was just adjusting to the change in their living situation, but it wasn't just that. Max's behavior was different. He wasn't just restless, he seemed to be sensing something. Something that Sarah couldn't yet see. "Max? What's going on, buddy?" Sarah asked, trying to calm him. Max paused, looking up at her with his big brown eyes, his ears perked and his nose twitching. It was like he was trying to tell her something. His attention was fixed on the corner of the room near the kitchen. Suddenly Max turned and ran towards the door, barking urgently. "Max! What is it?" Sarah called, getting up from the couch, her heart starting to race. Max barked again, more urgently this time, his tail wagging furiously as he looked back at Sarah. Without thinking, Sarah followed him into the kitchen, where Max stopped, standing between her and the door. His eyes were wide alert, as if he was waiting for something. Sarah didn't know what he was trying to warn her about, but instinctively she felt a surge of anxiety. She had seen Max act like this before, but never quite this intensely. Something was wrong, but she didn't know what. Just as she was about to call Michael, she heard it, a faint, crackling sound from outside. It was almost too soft to hear at first, but then it grew louder. It was unmistakable, the sound of something burning. "Is that fire?" Sarah whispered, a cold chill running down her spine. Max barked once more and ran to the window, his body tense. He was trying to tell her something. Sarah rushed over and pulled the blinds aside. And there it was, smoke. Thick, dark smoke rising from the neighbor's house. The fire had already started. Her heart stopped for a moment. She couldn't believe it. In the days after the fire, she'd been so focused on her family's recovery that she hadn't even considered the possibility of another fire nearby. But now, it was real. Another family's home was in danger. And Max, ever the protector, had sensed it before anyone else. Without hesitation, Sarah ran to grab her phone to call 911. But before she could dial, Max barked again, more urgently this time. He was agitated now, pacing and pulling at the door, as if he knew the danger wasn't just outside, it was close. "Max, stay! We need to call for help!" Sarah shouted, trying to calm him, but Max wasn't listening. He darted to the front door and began scratching at it with his paws, whining and tugging at the handle. Something about the way Max was acting made Sarah's heart race. It was as if he knew that every second mattered. She quickly dialed Michael, her hands shaking. "Michael! There's a fire!" It's close. "We need to..." Sarah started to say, but before she could finish, she heard a loud crashing sound from outside. Max began to howl. "Max, no!" Sarah shouted. But the dog was already at the door, his paws scrabbling to get out. In that moment, something clicked inside Sarah's mind. Max had never been this insistent, this driven. The urgency in his actions was undeniable. He wasn't just trying to warn them about the fire, he was trying to get them to safety, and that's when it hit her. Max wasn't just the family's dog, he was their protector. As Sarah opened the door, Max bolted out without a second thought, running full speed toward the front yard. Sarah followed him, her heart pounding in her chest. In the distance, the neighbor's house was now engulfed in flames, but Max wasn't concerned with that. He was focused on getting his family out of harm's way. "Max, wait for me!" Sarah cried as she followed him, her voice shaky. But Max didn't stop. He ran straight to the far end of the yard, then looked back at her, as if to say, "Come on, we need to go." His tail was wagging, but there was a seriousness to his demeanor. This wasn't just a game. This was a matter of life and death. Sarah ran faster, her legs feeling heavy but driven by the urgency of Max's actions. She couldn't understand it fully, how he had sensed the fire before anyone else, or how he knew exactly what to do. But as she followed him into the yard and down the path leading away from the house, she realized something that would stay with her forever. Max had saved them all, not just from the fire, but from the chaos and fear that had surrounded them in the wake of it. He had been the one to keep them safe. He had known even when they didn't. And as they ran together, the smoke from the neighbor's house growing thicker in the distance, Sarah felt a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude. Max had done what no one else could. He had kept them safe again. As the family gathered around their new makeshift safety point away from the dangers of the fire, Max stood by his eyes, calm yet alert. He had done his job. And in that moment, Sarah couldn't imagine her life without him. Max, the brave protector, had once again proven why he wasn't just a dog. He was a hero. As the days passed, the reality of the fire began to sink in. The family was safe, but their home was gone. The fire had taken everything: clothes, furniture, memories. But it hadn't taken their lives. It hadn't taken their sense of hope, and more than anything, it hadn't taken their deep gratitude for Max the dog, who had saved them. That evening, after the fire had been contained, and the emergency crews had left, the Parker family sat in a temporary shelter, a friend's house that they'd been able to stay in while figuring out what to do next. The smoke still lingered in the air, and the adrenaline from the fire was slowly wearing off, leaving exhaustion in its wake. But amidst the weariness, there was something else in the room. A deep, unspoken thankfulness. Max lay at the foot of Sarah's chair, his golden coat still shiny despite the day's chaos. His head rested on his paws, and he watched the family with that quiet, knowing gaze he always had. To anyone else, he was just a dog. But to the Parkers, Max was a hero, a protector, a lifeline. "Max, you're the best dog in the world," Michael said softly, his voice heavy with emotion. He scratched behind Max's ears, and the dog responded with a contented wag of his tail. "You saved us. You really did." Sarah smiled down at Max, her eyes welling up with tears. "You knew, didn't you? You knew something was wrong before any of us did. You kept us safe. I don't even know how to thank you." George, who had been unusually quiet throughout the day, cleared his throat and looked down at Max with a mixture of admiration and affection. "I've never seen anything like it," he said, his voice gruff but filled with sincerity. "That dog, he's got a heart of gold. And instincts sharper than anything I've ever known. Him. Not just a pet. He's family." The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with emotion. The family sat in silence, each of them processing the events of the past few days in their own way. But they all shared one common thought. Max had been their silent guardian, their unrecognized protector, the entire time. He had stepped up when they needed him most, without hesitation, without thought, for his own safety. "Max, you're more than just a dog. You're a hero," Michael said quietly, his voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you for everything." Max didn't respond with words, of course, but as Michael spoke, the dog's eyes softened, and he gave a little sigh of contentment. It was as if he understood, as if he knew that his actions had meant something deep and profound. Family. Over the next few days, the Parker family settled into a new rhythm. They were staying with friends and working on rebuilding their lives. There was still so much to do: paperwork, insurance claims, finding a new home. But through it all, one thing remained constant: Max. Every time they felt overwhelmed by the challenges ahead, they would look at Max, and their hearts would settle. There was something incredibly grounding about the dog's unwavering calm. In the face of crisis, when the world seemed to be falling apart, Max had been the one to anchor them. He was the steady presence they could always rely on. "Max, you're our rock," Sarah would say every night before bed, her arms wrapped around Lily. "Thank you for everything you did." And every time Max would respond in his own quiet way, a gentle nudge of his nose against Sarah's hand, or a soft wag of his tail. His presence was more than enough. It was everything. As time went on, Max continued to prove himself not just as a dog, but as a true protector. He stayed by the family's side every step of the way, always ready to step in when needed. He guarded their new home with the same vigilance he had shown before. He was there when Michael needed a comforting presence after a tough day at work, when Sarah needed a moment of peace after a long day with Lily, and when George needed someone to share a quiet moment with on the porch. Max's bond with the family grew even stronger in the weeks that followed. He wasn't just a dog anymore. He was the heart of the family, the protector they could never replace. He had done the unthinkable, saving them from danger, and in return the family gave him everything they had: love, gratitude, and a place in their hearts forever. The fire may have taken their home, but it had brought something even more precious into their lives. Max, the dog who had saved them all. And as they moved forward, rebuilding their lives and their home, they did so knowing that they were never truly alone. They had Max by their side. And with him, they could face anything. Sometimes in the quiet moments after a storm, when everything seems to settle into a new kind of peace, we find ourselves reflecting on the things that truly matter. For the Parker family, that reflection had come in the form of Max, their loyal golden retriever. Max had always been there through the small moments and the big ones. From the first time he ran into Sarah's lap as a puppy, to the way he stayed by George's side after the loss of his wife. Max had been more than just a pet. He had been a companion, a confidant, and a protector. Now, after the fire, the family was coming to terms with the fact that Max had been their guardian all along. He hadn't just been a dog living with them in the house. He had been watching over them, sensing danger, and stepping in when they needed him most. As Sarah sat on the porch one evening watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and orange, she couldn't help but think about how much they had been through as a family. Fire had been a devastating event, one that could have torn them apart, but instead it had brought them closer together, and it had deepened their appreciation for the love and loyalty they shared with Max. She glanced over at the dog who was lying contentedly on the porch, watching the world go by with his usual calm demeanor. In that moment she realized something. Max had taught them more than just the value of loyalty. He had shown them what it meant to truly care for one another. He had reminded them of the importance of protecting the ones we love, no matter the cost. And in a world where so much could be uncertain, Max had proven that sometimes the greatest strength lies in the simplest of acts, in being there for the ones who need you most. "Thank you, Max," Sarah whispered softly as if the dog could understand her words. "Thank you for being our protector. For being our family." Max looked up at her, his brown eyes soft and full of understanding. And for a moment it felt as though everything in the world was right again. As the days turned into weeks, the Parker family began to rebuild, not just their home, but their lives. The fire had taken so much from them, but it had also given them something invaluable, a deeper sense of unity, a newfound strength, and a realization that they could face any challenge as long as they were together, and none of that would have been possible without Max. Max had become the family's steady anchor, their unwavering source of strength. Every morning when the world still felt uncertain, they would find comfort in his presence. His calm eyes, his steady gaze, and his silent way of showing affection became their reminder that no matter how hard things got, they were not alone. One evening, after a particularly long day of sorting through insurance paperwork and trying to make sense of the mess the fire had left behind, Michael sank into the couch exhausted. Sarah had put Lily to bed, and George had gone to bed eerily tired from the stress. But Max remained beside Michael, as he always did. The dog was lying on the floor at his feet, his head resting on his paws. "You know, buddy," Michael said, his voice a little hoarse from the long day, "I don't know how we would have made it through this without you." Max lifted his head at the sound of Michael's voice, his brown eyes full of understanding. Michael leaned down and scratched the dog behind the ears. "You've been the only constant through all of this, Max. The fire, the mess, the confusion, you've been the one thing that's kept us grounded." Max's tail gave a soft thump on the floor in response, and Michael smiled a small, tired smile. "Think we've thanked you enough," Michael continued. "You saved us. You're the reason we're all still here. And for that, we owe you everything." Max just looked at him with that same calm, unwavering gaze. To anyone else it might have just seemed like a dog looking back at his owner. But to Michael, it was more than that. It was as though Max understood every word, every sentiment. The bond they shared, forged through the fire, and strengthened in the aftermath, was unspoken, but deep. Max had stepped up in a moment of crisis when it mattered most, and in doing so he had changed everything for the Parkers. He had shown them what it meant to be strong, to protect, and to love unconditionally. That night, as Michael drifted off to sleep, he found himself thinking about everything they had lost, but also about everything they still had: each other and Max, the dog who had been their hero, their guardian, their silent protector. And as long as they had him by their side, they knew they would be okay. They had come through the storm, and now together they would build something even stronger in the aftermath. Thanks to Max. In the months that followed, life began to return to a new kind of normal for the Parker family. The smell of fresh paint filled the air as they worked together to restore their new home. The sound of construction could be heard around the neighborhood as other families too rebuilt from the wreckage of the fire. But for the Parkers, the rebuilding was about more than just brick and mortar. It was about healing, growing stronger, and cherishing the things that truly mattered. Max continued to be their constant companion. His bond with the family deepened, and they were reminded every day of the extraordinary thing he had done for them. He wasn't just a dog. He was their hero, their guardian, the reason they had survived the fire, and the reason they could face each new challenge with hope. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, the Parkers gathered in their new backyard for a quiet family moment. Max was lying in the grass, his tail wagging slowly as he watched the family with contentment. Sarah, Michael, and George sat together enjoying the peace they had fought so hard to regain. And Lily, now a toddler, toddled around the yard, giggling as she played. "This is our home," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. "This is where we're meant to be." Michael smiled, reaching down to stroke Max's fur. "We wouldn't be here if it weren't for him," he said, his voice full of gratitude. Max looked up at him, his eyes warm and steady, as if acknowledging the truth in Michael's words. "He saved us," George added quietly, his voice full of emotion. He didn't hesitate. He knew what needed to be done. The family sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of those words settle in. They had been through so much, but together, they had made it through. And, at the heart of it all, was Max, the dog who had saved them. The dog who had never once let them down. As the evening wore on, the family continued to reflect on their journey and on the remarkable loyalty of their golden retriever. They knew that they would always carry the legacy of that night with them, the night Max had risked everything to save them. And every year on the anniversary of the fire, they would gather to remember, to celebrate, and to honor their hero. The hero who was more than just a dog. He was family. Max's story would never be forgotten. It would live on not just in the family's memories, but in the way they lived their lives. Grateful, strong, and ever reminded of the deep, unbreakable bond they shared with their extraordinary dog. Max had given them everything. And in return, they would always give him their love, their loyalty, and their gratitude, because he had proven that the greatest heroes sometimes come in the form of a dog. Incredible story of loyalty, courage, and love. Max truly showed us that heroes can come in all shapes and sizes, even with 4 paws. If this heartwarming story touched you, make sure to share it with your friends and family. Let them know how powerful the bond between humans and animals can be. If you have a pet, take a moment to appreciate them, because they might just be your hero when you least expect it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing true stories that remind us of the beauty in the world. And remember, a pet's love is unconditional, so show them some love today. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you in the next story.